In the beginning, a baby boy was sent down to earth. January 27, 1938. This is his story. Where do I begin? It was a cold, dark, stormy night or a beautiful, sunshiny day. I think I'll start from my earliest memories of being alive on earth. The house with the red roof is the first one I can remember living in. The house on the left is where my favorite babysitter used to live until she moved to Hawaii. And then I always dreamed about going there someday and finding her. She always let us stay up late, and one New Year's Eve she made us a BLT sandwich and let us go out on the porch at midnight and beat pots and pans. I think I was about 4 years old at that time. I sure missed her, thought of going to Hawaii to find her someday. There used to be a grocery store just a little ways away from our house. It's no longer there. My dad used to give me a note and some money to go buy cigarettes for him. I'd get candy for myself at times. This was my favorite tree to climb when I come home from kindergarten. I'd go in the house and get some little comic books, some candy and stuff, and a little soda, climb up in that tree and sit there for hours. I nailed a board to one of those branches so I could have a place to set all my candy and junk that I brought up there with me. There was another tree here that was over our playhouse my dad cut down. Then he went and got some dynamite and blew that stump out of the ground. Just before he lit the fuse, he had me run up to the back of the house. Then he lit the fuse and he ran up where I was. And when that thing went off, boy, it rained for 5 minutes. Dirt and mud and everything. Man, was that exciting. Then one Christmas I got this little kid's gardening tools. Mom set me up with a spot in the backyard. I planted lettuce, tomatoes, and some string beans. I'm sure we must have picked them and ate them, but I don't remember. I just remember digging the dirt up to plant everything. I had a few friends that lived on the same block, and one of these guys, his dad dug a tunnel underground and made a room big enough for about 3 of us guys to sit in. We had flashlights, and his mother would make us sandwiches for lunch, and we'd sit down there and eat lunch and read comic books. The area has sure changed since the 1940s. In the mornings, we'd walk from our house all the way down to the bus stop to catch a bus to St. Patrick's School. It's only less than a mile walk down there. But we'd leave our house right there and walk down the street to the corner. It looks like a long walk, but it's really not. But down at the end of the block here, there was a building, then there was a big ice machine that sat next to it. And we saved our ice cream, our popsicle sticks. And there was where the ice machine was. We'd take those popsicle sticks and break them off to fit the coin slot and shove it in, and a big block of ice would come rumbling out, and then we'd take off down the street heading to the bus stop. Never did get caught. I don't know whatever happened to all the ice. It probably just sat there and melted. But we didn't do it every morning, just maybe once or twice a week. Just a little 6-year-old and 8-year-old mischievous little kids. So we walk on down here to the bus stop at the end of the street, right on the corner of Santa Clara and 24th Street. That's the school I went to at kindergarten, Selma Linder or something like that. It's all apartment buildings now. But right here is where we used to catch the bus and take that ride all the way down to St. Patrick's. And if we were lucky, we would catch a bus driver named Ed. He was our favorite bus driver because he let us keep the money for the bus tickets. So we'd take the bus all the way down to the school, get off, go across the street where they had a little pastry shop, and we'd buy a couple of donuts before we went into class. Ah, the good old days. Now there's St. Patrick's School. There's the entranceway to the playground. So we get to school in the mornings, that's where we went out to the playground. The thing was pretty big. We used to play Rover, send Don right over, or some kind of games like that, and run back and forth across the schoolyard. Sure got my exercise in. That's where I went to first grade. Then in 1943, my parents went through a divorce, and they decided in 1944 to sell the house. So then we moved over to a little community called Willow Glen, way over on the west side of town. A nice small little community, really nice. I think my mom said they paid about $6,000 for this place. It was small, 2-bedroom. It was kind of nice. There's a big tree in the backyard that I used to climb up to, and I did the same thing. Nailed some borders to some branches up there, and I'd go sit up there and have my comic books and snacks, look around over the neighborhood. Then this big tree across the street, a big pine tree. My brother and me used to climb up the top of that thing with our slingshots. We'd climb as high as we could to the top, and then sit there with our slingshots and little rocks or beans and shoot at the traffic as they came by. We hit a pickup truck one day from up there. He got out and looked around all over the place. Never did spot us up there in the tree. We stopped doing that. Then when Sunday morning happened to be Father's Day morning, my brother and me got up real early. These homes weren't built yet. This was still a big empty lot full of dry grass, but they were building a house next door over here. So my brainy brother decides to light up some of the grass on fire and stomp it out. He did that several times, then after a while he couldn't stomp it out, and the whole thing took off. We ran back in the house and got back in bed and waited for the fire trucks. Then we came outside to see what all the commotion was all about. Never did get caught. Then one day I was riding on the back of the bicycle with my brother, and I had a match shooter that I made out of a clothespin. He dared me to shoot it into this lot that was full of dried grass. Now, I didn't think it was going to reach, so I shot it. The thing went over and stayed lit and caught the grass on fire. Well, we took off like crazy, went back home again, waiting for the fire department to come. Just another mischievous day in our lives. Never did get caught on that one either, but they suspected us. The fire department did come down to talk. I had several friends in the neighborhood. One of them lived just down the street from me during the summertime. He'd come and spend the summer with his grandmother. And behind their house, where these houses are now, there wasn't any back then. It was probably 4 or 5 houses that weren't built. And there was a big field right along here, and we'd go play tackle football. I had some fun times in this neighborhood. During the summer, my brother and me got into a lot of mischief. We'd always head down to this store in the corner. If we needed some extra spending money, we'd go to the back end of the store and find a lot of Coke bottles the guy had stored back there. Then we'd go around to the front of the store and cash them in, buy candy and junk. I don't think he ever found out that we were stealing his bottles and he was paying us to get them back. Then if we really got desperate for money, we'd come across on the street on this corner over here, set up a little lemonade stand and comic books. We'd had old comic books. We'd try to sell them for a couple of pennies. Business wasn't really that great. And then when summer was over, it was back to school. So from my house, I walked all the way down to school. There was only about a mile or so away. It wasn't that far. I went to 2nd grade here. This is Willow Glen Elementary School. It's changed a lot since I was there, but it's still a school. Right in the corner of downtown Willow Glen. There's the school. This has become a pretty yuppie neighborhood. A lot of expensive homes here. They're still teaching kids at that school. What I liked about it was in the 2nd grade, at lunchtime, we could just walk off school, go right across the street into downtown Willow Glen. We used to go down there and go shopping, well, shoplifting more or less. Right here used to be a little grocery store. I'd go in and help myself to things. Everything was free to us kids, you know how that is. I did a lot of little shopping, more or less, in this little town in the 2nd grade. Right there was a restaurant where my sometimes babysitter used to work. I'd go in there and get a free hamburger and fries sometimes. And down the street over here, there was a little bakery. And my buddy and me would get off at lunchtime and walk down here for 10 cents. Right there, you get a loaf of bread, French bread, freshly baked for 10 cents. We'd break that in half and eat that and walk back to school. This is a great little town. I really enjoyed living over in that area. This town sure has turned into a cool little town. Yuppies all over, nice little outdoor restaurants and everything. I used to stop at this house a lot of times on my way home from school. And just to the right of that house, there used to be an orange tree and a pomegranate tree. And 1 or 2 times a week, I'd stop and pick one. Then one day, the lady came out and happened to spot me, and I thought I was going to be in big trouble. But she said anytime I want an orange or a pomegranate, just come up to the door, knock, and let her know. She'd help me pick them so that I don't accidentally break a branch off. She was a pretty nice old lady. Down the street there on the left is the old Garden Theater. We used to go there a lot when we were kids. Later it changed to Mexican movies only, then eventually they shut it down and made other things out of it. And now it's kind of like a farmer's market, a little walk-in mall, like a flea market of sorts. Kind of a neat little place. Times have changed. There's some more yuppie little restaurants and stores on the right-hand side here. This used to be the end of town, but further down there's still more town. They expanded it way out there. There's a few yuppies out here. Must be early morning. Once summer was over, I was back to school again, but this year I was in the 3rd grade, so my mother put us into St. Mary's Catholic School. Went there until the 7th grade. Middle of the 7th grade, I finally transferred out. But this was the way I rode my bike all the way to school. Rarely ever took a bus, was always riding our bikes. Unless it rained, then we'd have to ride a bus all the way down to 1st Street and transfer to another bus and come on down to 3rd Street where the school was. I think my sister was still going to Willow Glen when she got into the 1st grade or kindergarten. It was only about a 3-mile ride on the bike, but it sure looks like a long ways and seemed like a long ride. Now this is 1st Street, so I'd ride my bike down that Willow all the way to 1st Street here. And then head down 1st Street so many blocks. And then I'd cut over here on this street and then get Reed Street and straight down Reed. Of course, these freeways weren't here at that time. That's 280. And there was the school on the right-hand side. It's got apartments there now. Across the street here was the St. Mary's Catholic Church. That burnt down several years after the school did. They never did rebuild either of them. On days when it would rain, I'd take the bus. So I'd walk on down 1st Street all the way to Santa Clara Street to catch the bus. In the meantime, I'd do my little shopping along the way at the different department stores and 5 and dime stores and drug stores. replenish my pencils and pens and little knickknacks that I thought were pretty cute. Then I'd head on down to First and Santa Clara Street, catch the bus, and ride on home. Right here's where we used to catch the bus. I believe that used to be a J.C. Penney's department store there. They had one of the first escalators in town. We'd ride it thing up and down all the time waiting for the bus. Next door used to be a Thrifty's drugstore. We'd go in there and get an ice cream while waiting on the bus to come. Years later, I think it was January of 1966, on my birthday, the boiler in that Thrifty's drugstore exploded. The floor caved in and several people sitting at the counter and walking close by the counter fell through the floor and got killed. One of them worked at Jennings Radio where I did. She was in a different department, but I knew who she was. On the weekends, I used to ride my bike into town here and go to the movies. On the right-hand side up here is where the studio theater is. It looks like it's still there, but I don't think it's making movies showing movies anymore. Funny how narrow the streets got now. There used to be 2 lanes in both directions, and cars could park on both sides. Now it's just 1 lane in each direction. They sure fancy the place up. Over here on the left is the California Theater. I used to go there quite a bit, and that's on First Street. There were several theaters down here. Some of them are gone now. But that's the California Theater there on the left. Further down on the left there was the Padre Theater, several others. Way down at the other end used to be the Victory Theater. That had a balcony on it. That was one I used to hang out a lot. Besides the other one over on 2nd Street. It's Original Joe's, and it's still there. Italian restaurant. This is still First Street. It's really gotten there. They took all the driving out. They put the monorail on the right-hand side there. Well, it's not really a monorail. I don't know what you'd call it. It's a trolley. And it's kind of a yuppie town now. Pretty expensive to live there. Used to be a great town to grow up in. Had some great times living there. It's really something how much this town has changed over the years. I left there in '55, joined the Navy, came back in '59, moved to Hawaii in '67, came back in 1970, and lived there until 1988, and then moved out of town to Applegate. In that time, they were just putting the trolley tracks in. If you look close, you can see them on the right side there. They've got trolley tracks all over this town. That runs for miles and miles from one end of San Jose to the other. Down the street, this is Market Street. You can see St. Joseph's Church down there. I used to go there for midnight mass at Christmas time with my mother when I was a kid. It's one of the oldest churches in town there yet. It's still there. Yeah, San Jose has really become a yuppie town. On the right side, you see the trolley tracks. Back in 1953 and '54, my buddy Bob Jakeways had a 1939 Dodge four-door sedan, painted all orange, rusty-looking orange color with a straight pipe. Used to love to drag the main down First Street and turn the engine off and turn it on again, and it would backfire and sound like a cannon going off. We had some fun times in that old car of his. We used to drag the main down one side of First Street looking for girls and come back up the other side. Didn't always get lucky. It was fun. This used to be the Padre Theater. I won free tickets to a Piper Cub airplane ride one time. My dad took me out there, and every time that pilot turned that plane just a little bit, I got scared. I thought I was going to fall out of it, like one of those carnival rides that you have. It was spooky. Sometimes during the summer months, my brother and me, maybe a couple other guys, would ride our bikes clear across town all the way up to Alum Rock Park. It's about a 15-mile ride. The fun part was coming back. Anyway, we'd take our bikes and head on up Willow Street all the way to First Street to Santa Clara Street, all the way up to Alum Rock Park. Packed a lunch, of course, took along with us. There'd be a couple of us guys usually. There's the ballpark. They've widened this road out a lot since we were kids. I was about 9 or 10 years old when we did this. There's the golf course on the left. It's kind of a nice ride on your bike all the way up there. Down into the little gully here. It's a pretty big park that I can't see much from this Google Earth thing. We used to go up there as a family and picnic a lot too. The fun part was coming back home. A lot of downhill. There's a very little uphill getting out of the park. Not too bad. But the park is hidden under all those trees. It was a great place to come as a young kid, as a 5, 6, 7-year-old, even 10, 11-year-old. They had a nice playground for kids, a big swimming pool that had about a 20-foot slide on it. That was a great place to go at nighttime sometimes. And going back out of the park, it was just a little bit of uphill, not too bad, till we got up here to the golf course. Then it was a pretty good shot of downhill for about 2 miles. That was the fun part, riding our bike back down here. It's a big, long road. It's about a 2-mile run down here. Just coast right along. And there's my future high school, James Lick. I'll be going to that one in a few more years. All the way back home to Willow Glen. Get ready for our next big adventure. This house was built in 1905, and I think my folks paid about about $6,000 for it. It sold in 2021 for $1.4 million, and the guy tore the place down, and this is the new house going up now as of 2022. I feel sorry for my great-grandkids' generation. Will they ever be able to afford a house? Then sometime in 1947, my mother got remarried to a sailor. When he got discharged, he used his GI Bill to buy a new house across town over on Newhall Street. So we moved out of that Curtis place, got a nice brand new home over here in a new subdivision. It was a nice 3-bedroom home, had a good sized backyard, had a basketball hoop on the garage so we could play basketball. A lot of the guys that come over and play there. So there's our house right there. It had a nice cherry tree in front and a nice green lawn. Of course, it doesn't look the same today. It was a nice little house. My buddy Richard, I went to junior high school with him. He lived just a few blocks away from me. Got to do a lot of mischief together. He was just a few blocks off over here in the same subdivision. It's really built up a lot around here since we were kids. His house is just down the street here. There's my buddy Richard's place. Used to sleep over every once in a while on a weekend. He'd come over to my place and spend the weekend. We got into a lot of mischief together. A lot of these subdivisions weren't here yet when we first moved in. Now here's our house, and right across the street were the only other houses in the subdivision. Behind them, there was nothing but an empty lot. So all those houses weren't here at the time when we first moved in. So in the summertime, we'd walk to the field across the street there and go to Washington Baseball Park, watch some of the college baseball games, and then wintertime we'd go to the Townsend Field across the street and watch the Santa Clara College football games. This is the old Lucky grocery store where Richard and me used to help ourselves to cigarettes and candy and stuff. Over here was an old empty lot where we played war games. That's the Buywise Market. I used to go in to help myself to candy. And this is another empty lot there. This place has sure grown since we were young teenagers back in the early 50s. This was the Buywise Market. I used to go in and help myself to comic books and candy and whatever I needed during the summer and a lot of times during the winter. And to go across the street and way in the back there was the old Lucky grocery store. Richard and me would go in there and help ourselves to candy and cigarettes and stuff. It's now changed into a little small mini shopping center. They almost caught us stealing cigarettes one day. As we walked out of the store, we walked to the checkout stand, grab a pack of cigarettes real quick, slip it in our back pocket, and walk out the front door. We got out, we looked back, and there was two checkers standing there looking at us. So we thought we were dead meat, but got away with it. Richard and me used to go to the back end of the store there, where they used to have Coke bottles and stuff stored. One of us would climb over the wall and grab the bottles and hand them up to the other guy on the other side. And then we'd go around the front, cash them in, get our money. And on our way out, we'd help ourselves to some cigarettes. Now there's my house there. And they were putting in a whole new subdivision right over next to us. And Richard and me would go over there and get on top of the roofs of the ones that people haven't moved into yet. And we'd run and jump from the high roof all the way over to the low roof. And check it out here. There's a lot of homes that have a high roof and a low roof right next door to it. We'd jump from that high roof. We got running pretty good and jump from that high roof over to the low roof. Go from house to house and do that. There's where we jump from a high one over to a low one, to a high one, to a low one, from a high one to a low one. I was doing that one day and I was right in the middle of my stride. I was running like crazy. And some woman come out of the back door of her house and saw me running and she let out a scream. And I was right in the middle of my stride, just about ready to jump. And I thought I was going to miss that house. I flew over there, landed, and then jumped off to the ground and took off out of there. We didn't do that anymore. We were afraid of people going to call the cops on us. Always in the mischief someplace. Anyway, these houses across the street from where I used to live, over there on Newhall Street, there's my house, and this bunch of homes right over here weren't there. So we used to just walk through that field and ride our bikes over that way. Get into Santa Clara, sometimes go to the movie theater. Now there's the Washington Baseball Park. And right next to it, to the left, was the Townsend football field. We'd go over there and play baseball a lot of times and hunt through the hedges and the bushes and find baseballs. And right here was War Memorial swimming pool. They had a 12-foot diving pool, an Olympic-sized swimming pool, and then a big wading pool. Had a lot of fun at that place all the time in the summer. Steal more Coke bottles, get money to get in. Then we'd take on our bikes sometimes and ride into town. It's downtown Santa Clara here. They had a movie theater and regular shopping center downtown there. It was a fun little old town. And then we finally moved away from Newhall Street and headed up to Alum Rock area, up in the foothills. Way up there close to Alum Rock Park. Got a house on Craigmont Street. There's our house, that brown one. From here I could walk over to my buddy's house or on over to high school. Don't know what happened to our bicycles. I don't remember riding them around up here. Must have sold them or gave them away before we moved up here. Now there's our house, and this is the way I went to school. Walk down at the corner here, head on down this street, and right over here on the right, that was my buddy Doug Wright's house. Further on down the street here, over on the right again, way over there, there's my buddy Bob Jakeway's, his house. We stayed friends even way after school, high school. So this was the road I'd take all the way down to my high school, right up the end of the street here. And right up here ahead is my other buddy, Don. And after high school, his sister married my buddy, Doug Wright. And they were married for over 55 years. Then she passed away from Alzheimer's. And there's my high school. It's grown a lot since I was there. The old James Lick. Got into a lot of mischief there. Most days at lunchtime, we'd head on down to the corner here, White Road and Alum Rock Road, and there's a creamery, Alum Rock Creamery was there. We'd have hamburgers, milkshakes, french fries. It was always delicious. And across the street over here, there was a bike shop and several other little shops. But the best one I liked was the record shop, because we could go in there for free. We could listen to all the newest records that came out. And sometimes Bob and me would cut school. He had a car, so we'd cut and we'd head on up to Alum Rock Park. Now there's a mountain up there, a small mountain we call Eagle Rock. So we drive up there to Alum Rock Park, park the car at the bottom of the hill. We had our lunch all packed, and we'd head on up there, sit up on top of the hill and have our lunch and look over the city. Got a great view from up there. Most times we got lucky and someone would buy us a 6-pack of beer to go with our lunch. And there's the San Jose Country Club golf course. A little further down here, you can be able to see where our homes are. There's our house, and there's James Lick High School. Sometimes in the summer, a lot of times especially, in the evening, we'd go up to Alum Rock Park to go swimming. We'd walk right on through the subdivision here. Of course, we always had a 6-pack. We'd walk up there and go across the golf course. Then on the way home, we'd go across the golf course and take the numbered flags that were in the holes on the golf course, hang them in our rooms for souvenirs. Then around October of 1954, I found out the GI Bill was going to go out of effect January 31st, 1955. By then I was going to be turning 17. Could get drafted at 18. Also found out folks are selling the house and moving over from the east side here all the way down into Willow Glen. That meant changing schools again and everything, and I said, the heck. Told my mother, take me downtown, I want to join the Navy. So she did. So before we moved down to Willow Glen, I'd start filling out paperwork to join the Navy. And they said that I could be sworn in before January 31st, I'd get the GI Bill. So that's what I did. In the meantime, we'd moved down here to Willow Glen. someplace on California Street. There's a lot of nice old homes here. This one here looked similar to the one my mother lived in before she passed away. They had a lot of different floor styles there. A lot of them kind of looked the same in a way. Anyway, we moved into that place in December of 54. And I was supposed to start school here at San Jose City Tech. I went over and got paperwork and everything else, brought it on home, showed that I signed up and everything, but I didn't. Figured I'm leaving for the Navy at the end of the month, so why go to school again? I already know everything, what the heck. It was a good school. Richard went there, and my other buddy Johnny Hogue, he went there. While Johnny was in class, I'd be sitting in his car and hotwire it and drive it around for a while, then come back and park. Sometimes Johnny would cut school for the day and we'd get a 6-pack of beer and head to Santa Cruz, make a day of it. There's the train station they took me to, 5 o'clock in the morning, to go up to San Francisco and get a physical, never knowing that I was never coming home that night. Mother was supposed to pick me up and I'd be home for dinner. So I got sworn in at 6 o'clock at night. Right down here is where I got my physical. Took all day, and at 6 o'clock in the evening, they swore us all in. There was probably about 60, 70 guys there. We all thought we were going home that night, but nope, that was January 31st. We had to be sworn in if we wanted to get that GI Bill. This little building down here, right there on the corner. We got our physical, and then they put us on a bus and hauled us all down to the San Francisco airport. And from there, we were all flown down to San Diego boot camp. I had to call my mother from the airport and tell her I wouldn't be home for dinner. They were shipping me out. We got down to San Diego late at night. And we slept on the benches there for 3 days and 3 nights. No beds, nothing. Freezing cold at January 31st, February 1st, 2nd, 3rd. There was the boot camp. And it was cold in the mornings. I ended up coming down with pneumonia about the first weekend after we got into our barracks. So I ended up in the hospital getting shots every day. And then the poor guys in the barracks, they ended up having to go to mess hall and be mess cooks. So I lucked out. I get to stay back in the barracks when I got out of the hospital. There was about 6 or 8 guys that stayed in the barracks to do the cleanup and the ironing and washing and everything. The guys on mess cooking had to do breakfast, lunch, and dinner, so they didn't get back to the barracks until late. Then they had to go to sleep because they had to get up early in the morning to be preparing breakfast every day. It was kind of rough on them, but we got their clothes washed and ironed for them, so that worked out okay. This is where we came to the marching field every morning. Line up there, all the different companies. First come, first served. Sometimes we got there a little late and had to end up in the back of the line because somebody didn't get into the roll call in time. There was about 80 guys in each company. There was probably 20 or 30 companies. There was quite a few guys lined up out there on that marching field getting ready for breakfast in the mornings. But after 4 weeks, we started hitting the good marks, about 100% rating for every morning inspection. So that gave us good top honors. And got to go to the front of the line every morning for the last 6 weeks we were there. So we had it made. This is where the cafeteria was. We'd line up, march into here and have our breakfast. Then it was off to class in the mornings. Then we graduated in April, and so I got the 30 days off in May to go home on leave before coming back and boarding my ship there in San Diego Harbor. Went aboard the USS Piedmont. That was in June of '55 when I went aboard ship. And it was anchored right here in San Diego Harbor. That was the home port. Then in August of '55, we sailed off to Japan, stopping in Hawaii for about 2 days in Pearl Harbor. Little did I know it at the time, but a little over a year later, there was an opening for an electrician in Pearl Harbor. Right where that arrow was, that's where the ship was tied up. So I transferred, and the rest is history. Spent 2 years there and loved every minute of it. Anyway, that short time that we were there, my buddy had a driver's license, so we rented a car, and we drove all over that island that whole day and halfway into the evening there. We ended up in the evening down here in Waikiki, and there's a big cement wall that goes out into the ocean a little ways. And my buddy Moose, a big kid, he picked me up pretending like he was going to throw me in the water, and my hat fell off. So it floated out there in Waikiki. It's probably out in the ocean someplace. Never did get it back. Then the next day we sailed off to Sasebo, Japan. Probably about another 5,000 miles or so. Took about 2 weeks almost to get there. Nice calm seas, no storms or anything. We pulled into Sasebo Harbor, spent the next 2 months there repairing ships. Since we were a repair ship, we had all kinds of ships that pulled alongside of us. Usually it was destroyers and maybe occasionally a submarine. But while we was in Sasebo, we set a record for having the most destroyers alongside at one time. There was 10 of them, 5 on each side. And every once in a while, the inboard one would have to go out. So that meant we had to pull all the cables back in that was feeding them power and then feed them back out when the ship left. You know, this is me waiting for my buddy so we could go into town on Liberty. Whenever I didn't have Liberty and I had a duty night, I'd have to stand watch at the switchboard. Now that's not me, but that's the switchboard that these panels control all the power throughout the ship. So if one generator starts going bad, we have to get 2 guys there to start shifting from one generator to the next before we lost complete power. Become a hassle sometimes. Anyway, we had a couple of months stay there in Sasebo, Japan. You know, did a lot of sightseeing. Naturally, found the local bars close by the ship. 17 years old and in the Navy. Who would have thought 8 months ago I was in school or cutting school. 16 years old, turned 17. A couple of days later I'm in boot camp, and here I am now, 17 years old in Japan, in the Navy. Who'd have thunk? One of the best decisions I ever made. Now these are the dry docks where all the ships would come that needed hull repair. And this is the little part of Sasebo, Japan that we'd come to and frequent quite a bit because these were our favorite bars in this area. Right down here was my first bar I started hanging out at a lot. I'd get a 24-ounce Asahi beer for about 60 cents. 200 yen. Took 360 yen to make $1. The first bar I started hanging around in, then later on I found more up the street here and all around. Really hasn't changed too much in over 60 years. Modernized just a little bit. Still looks fairly familiar yet. Of course, there are some areas that have really modernized. This little section here looks like it's picked up quite a bit. And naturally, every place has got to have their super mall here. Big shopping center. That wasn't there when I was there. We were there in Sasebo for about 2 months. And then sometime in November, we sailed off to Hong Kong for 2 weeks of R&R. Rest and recreation. And the 2 weeks I was there, I only had one duty night. So for almost 2 weeks, my buddies and me got to go sightseeing all around Hong Kong. Hong Kong is a small island off of mainland China. Used to be independent, and now who knows what it is. So there's Hong Kong Island right off of China, and our ship anchored right there in Hong Kong Harbor. There's Hong Kong right across that little harbor there, the little bay. None of these buildings were here when I was here back in '55. Right at the top of that hill is Tiger Balm Gardens, and that's where our little guides for the day took us. You had to take a tram up the side of the mountain there, just like a ski lift. Just ride that thing all the way to the top of the mountain, and it was like a lot of shrines built into the side of the mountain. It's quite a sight to see. I had my little tiny camera with me, so I got a couple of shots from up there. We're looking back down with all the ships in the harbor there. Not sure which one was ours. These are our little tour guides who volunteer. We met them in town. They volunteered to be our guides for the day. Of course, we had to pay them and then feed them dinner that night. But this is quite a place to see, and from what I understand now, there's not much of it left. There's very few of these shrines left up there in that mountainside. That was quite a place to see. But like every place else, progress moves on. Hong Kong is a thriving place now. While we were in Hong Kong for 2 weeks, we found out that you can go to a tailor shop in town and get free beer if you have clothes made for you. So my buddy and me one day decided we're going to go into town and get a jacket made, maybe a pair of slacks, and maybe some other clothes. So for the next couple of weeks of our R&R, we'd go back into town every couple of days for more fittings, have a few beers, then head back into town to the local bar and have a few more beers for the rest of the day. This was a pretty dirty town at the time. There were fish markets up and down almost every street. The whole town just stunk like crazy. We never did go back to get the clothes that we ordered. About 2 days before we were going to sail back to Sasebo, Japan, we went back into town again, but we skipped the tailor shop because we knew he was going to have our suits ready for us, and we didn't have the money to pay for them in the first place. Just wanted to get free beer while we were there. So we finally sailed off from Hong Kong back to Sasebo, Japan for another month or so before heading over to the Philippines. On our way back to Sasebo, somewhere probably about 2 days out, we ran into a huge typhoon. Our ship was going up and down. The propellers on the back end came up out of the water and the whole ship vibrated. My buddy and me had fun sliding from one side of the ship to the other side until he fell down and almost went overboard. Good thing his arms caught on the lifeline around the side. About that time, they announced all hands below deck. It was too rough to be above deck. So we headed over to Subic Bay, the Philippines, for the next couple of months before heading back to the United States to go into dry dock in Bremerton, Washington. Once again, there was no dock to tie up to, so we had to anchor out there in the middle of the bay, take little motor launches into the town to go to Liberty. One of my duties as an electrician was to take care of the motor launch boats that took the guys ashore. I had to take care of the batteries, make sure they were charged, make sure all the running lights were working. So some days when I had duty, I'd climb down into the boat that was going to take everybody ashore and just pretend like I was working on everything to check it out. And I'd go over to the EM club that's on the base over there and have a few beers and then wait for the next boat to come back, pick me up and take me back to the ship. On the days I had liberty, I'd take the motor launch over to the dock, hire one of these little taxis here to take us into town, about 2 miles or so. We'd go to our favorite little bar right along the river and have a few beers there. Our favorite bar was right there along the river. We'd throw coins over the balcony on the second floor, and the kids would jump into the water to try to find the coins we threw in. Then on New Year's Eve, 1955, a group of us were headed back to the ship after spending the day and night drinking. Most of us were pretty gassed. Anyway, Moose, my friend, and another guy got into an argument, and they were going to dare each other to jump off the wall into the river there. And a bunch of us tried to talk them down out of it. And finally, I grabbed Moose and pulled him off the wall because I knew if they jumped in, they were going to land in the rocks in the water about 10 feet down below. I told Moose if he got back on that wall again, I was going to kick his butt. He just stood there and laughed at me and dared me, so I hauled off and slugged him a couple of times in the gut, and he just laughed. He put his hand on my head and just held me there, and I'm swinging in air. Never did hit him again. Next morning when I walked into the electric shop, everybody started calling me Mighty Mouse. Moose is 6 foot, 200 pounds, and I was all of 110 pounds at 5'8". We stayed good buddies. Everybody got a laugh out of it. Then a couple of days later, we left Subic Bay and headed back to Seattle, Washington, Bremerton, Washington, to go into dry docks. We spent another month or so in dry dock there before we headed back down to San Diego for the rest of the season. This is the dry docks in Bremerton, Washington. Our ship was in one of these little slips someplace, and it was up out of the water. We were doing a lot of cleaning the barnacles off the bottom and everything, doing a lot of electrical work and other stuff on the ship to get it ready for sailing in 6 months back overseas again. When we went on Liberty, we had to take a ferry boat from Bremerton all the way over to Seattle. Took about 2 hours to get over there. One of my buddies in the electric shop went to high school here and graduated, so he had a lot of friends in town. So on the weekend when we didn't have duty, we'd meet up with all those guys and have a good time for the weekend. Had a nice time while we was in Seattle there. Then it was time to get the ship back in the water and head on back to San Diego. One night in July, in fact it was July 16th, 1956, that my buddy from Seattle borrowed a car from another guy in our shop there, and we drove on down to Tijuana. It's a pretty short drive. It's only about, I think, 15 miles or so from San Diego. So we had a few bucks in our pocket, thought we'd go down and have a few beers, because down there they don't check your ID. The town has sure cleaned up a lot since we were there back in the 50s. It's cleaned up a lot. They paved the streets, tore down some of the old bars and places, and built nice little restaurants. So after about 3 beers, it was about time to head on back to the ship. We were broke. It was probably about 10 o'clock at night, because I know it was dark. We got in the car and we headed back down the freeway, back up towards San Diego. Somewhere along here, we were doing about 65 miles an hour. And some woman coming down the other side of the freeway decided she wanted to cross, make a left turn, and crossed right in front of us. And we plowed into her car and hit her right on the engine side and spun her car completely around. My head went through the windshield. I ended up in the hospital for the next 2 weeks in plastic surgery ward. Had several stitches, but everything seemed to heal pretty good after 2 weeks, so they didn't have to do any plastic surgery. But one slice came right across my eyelid. Had it gone deeper, I'd have lost the eyeball. So everything healed up over the years and doesn't look too bad. The people that owned the car wanted me to sue, so I guess I did, and I got a couple thousand out of it. That was quite a bit back in those days. Another little adventure while stationed in San Diego. My buddy Moose and me used to go to the VFW, Veterans of Foreign War Lodge, and we were allowed to drink there. Nobody ever questioned us. Anyway, there was this Navy captain there that befriended us over a period of time. And one night, Moose went into the restroom, and while he was there, this guy propositioned me, gave me his address, and told me to ditch Moose and come up to his place. I said I would. So he left, and then when Moose come out of the restroom, I told him what happened and what I was going to do. I was going to go up to his place and beat the heck out of him. So I took off, and Moose came after me, tried to stop me. I don't know if you can see the little red line on there, but these were the streets that I ran up and all around town trying to ditch Moose. I finally did, and then when I got to that guy's supposed address, there was no such place, so I went back to the ship, told Moose all about it. That captain never did show up at the VFW again, but we continued to have our little beers there. Then one day in early November, I heard it was going to be an opening for an electrician in Pearl Harbor, and I thought my dream might come true, Hawaii. So I jumped at the chance, and then never heard anything for about a month. And then one day, some guy come down and told me if I beat 6 other guys out, I got it. Packed my suitcase or packed my sea bag. I'm going home on 30 days leave before I check into Pearl Harbor. Boy, the excitement that went through me. The ship I got stationed on was a small yard oiler, refueled ships in the harbor there, and it was tied up to the dock right here on this corner. I see a submarine there now. Had about a 10-man crew, so I was the only electrician, and that was great duty because we just went around Pearl Harbor and refueled ships that couldn't get into the fueling dock. Either they were too big or there were too many other ships in the dock already. So it was great duty for 2 years. I had a buddy aboard ship who went out and got a job, so on his off-duty days, he'd go to this restaurant. It's a restaurant bar. He worked as a waiter and a part-time bartender at night. So come 4 o'clock when I got off duty, I'd head over there to the bar and get free drinks from him. This place was called the Aiea Family Restaurant. About once a month, when most of us guys were off duty, we'd hop in my car and pack up some beer and head over here to a place called Keehee Lagoon. Sometimes we'd spend the whole weekend there just camping on the beach. And other times you'd get the whole ship would come over. All the crew would come because we were completely off duty for the day. We'd come out here and have a big barbecue and picnic. Always a good place to come. The weather was always nice, so you could camp on the beach without a tent. Just lay a blanket down on the sand, have a little bonfire going. On other weekends, everybody'd hop in my car. We'd head over here to our favorite beach. It was Hanauma Bay, right next to Koko Head Volcano. That was a great beach to go camping at. We'd spend a whole weekend there. Only thing is, you had to park up on the hill, then pack everything you needed all the way down to the beach. Good thing we were young, because that's quite a hike back up there to the parking lot. This road was for emergency vehicles only, in case somebody got injured down there. Now I think they have a regular shuttle that takes you from the parking lot all the way down to the beach and back up again. The beach sure is crowded now when this picture was taken. It sure wasn't back in 1958, 59. It's a great place to come and spend our weekends a lot of times. Got married while I was stationed in Pearl Harbor and had one on the way when I got sent back to the mainland for discharge. Then in January of 1959, my time was up in Pearl Harbor, so I was flown back to Long Beach, California to be discharged. It took about 4 days to go through the complete physical, dental, and whatever else they had to do. And then I was discharged there in Long Beach. And then I was on my own, find my own way home. So on January the 19th, I was discharged, honorably discharged from the Navy, got my paycheck, bought a plane ticket, and flew back home to San Jose, California. I moved in with my mom for a short time until we could find an apartment. So Mom had another place there in Willow Glen. Really nice little house, Spanish style. So I stayed there for a while and then finally was able to fly my wife Betty back over. And within a few weeks, she gave birth to our first daughter, Joanne. I finally found a nice little apartment over in Santa Clara. It was a nice 2-story house. The landlord lived down below and we lived upstairs. They tore it down about 8 months after we moved in because they wanted to build this roadway here, this off-ramp or on-ramp to the De La Cruz Boulevard. So the landlord and them had a house right next door that they owned. So they let the city tear the whole house down there and they moved into the one next door. And we had to move out and find another one. While we were living there, I had a job that I got 2 days after I got out of the Navy. So from there, I'd drive across town to this Central Music Company. It was out of a guy's house. He put jukeboxes and pinball machines in a lot of restaurants and bars. So my job was to go service him. He had a nice shop in the back of his house here. But it just didn't pay very much, so I finally got another job. So I'd leave from this house in the morning and drive clear across town to 24th Street, where I went to work for Jennings Radio. Started out as a janitor, and after about 3 months working the night shift, I was able to talk myself into going into what they call the exhaust department, where it's processing high voltage capacitors and things. After 5 years, I worked myself up to lead man on the swing shift for the next 3 years. Then we finally had to move out of this house here because they were tearing that down. And we moved clear over to the east side into a little 1-bedroom apartment. Well, at that time, we were expecting a second child, Sandy. So we stayed there for just a few months, probably about 4 or 5 months. Then I realized with another baby on the way, we're going to have to get another place. So this is the apartment we were living in when Sandy was born. And I had to find another place to live. So I finally found a place over on 24th Street. It was only about a mile or so from where I was working at Jennings Radio. So that made it pretty convenient. The landlady lived in the back. There was a little 1 studio apartment or something in the back of this here place, and that's where the landlady lived. We lived in the front in the two-bedroom house, and she lived behind it in a little apartment or a little studio, whatever it was. Then she got sick with cancer, and her daughter wanted to move into the house in front so she could be close to take care of her. So once again, off we go looking for another place. Finally found a nice little two-bedroom duplex. We lived there for less than a year, and we're expecting a third child, Don Jr. That's when I realized I was going to need a bigger place. That's when my brother told me about homes that are all going on sale now for the GIs, nothing down, and I forgot just a couple $175 closing costs. So I went over and checked it out and signed up, bought a house. This is where we were living when Lizzie and Cindy were born. $13,500. 3-bedroom, nice big backyard. We were there for 6 years before finally moving to Hawaii. So in August of 1967, the family packed up everything and flew off to Hawaii and moved in with Grandma Kapahu. I stayed behind so I could pack up the furniture or sell the furniture, pack the clothing and everything else, and sell the house before I moved over. We spent a couple of months there at Grandma Kapahu's place on Lily Haw Court Lane. It was a pretty old house. It was tore down years later. They built apartments and other things there now, but that old house is gone. There's a couple of buildings still left there. As of now, it's all fairly new stuff and new buildings in there now. We stayed there for a few months, and then we got into the housing in Kalihi Valley, just a couple of miles away. We were, of course, in the back building there. Didn't have any parking in the area then. It was all way down in the front, and you had to walk up the hill, carry all your groceries and everything all the way to the back apartments up there. Uncle John and his family would come over once or twice a week. We'd take a couple of beers and climb up the top of this hill here, sit there and have our beers and look over the city. Had a great view from there. I worked as an electrician for a while. Then I got a job as a carpenter apprentice. And every morning I'd have to drive out from Kalihi Valley, about 20 miles out to Pearl City. We were working on a school building out there. This is the building I worked on for a couple of months. And then Uncle Marcus got me a job as an electrician down in the shipyards. I was going to take on a crew of 4 or 5 guys, and 5 Japanese ships were coming in, and one of them I was going to take a crew on, and we were going to tear out all the wiring and redo all the wiring on that ship. I was supposed to start on Monday morning, but over the weekend I got a call to come to Kauai for an appliance repairman job. So they flew me over and showed me the island. I liked what it looked like. I decided I'm going to go ahead and take the job. So I moved over there, became an appliance repairman on Kauai. Was there for almost 2 years, really loved it. This is the building where the appliance store was that I worked out of. It was a great job, had a lot of nice people to work with, got to travel all over the islands. Not sure what kind of business is in there now. We sold appliances and did repairs on TVs and everything. When I first got there, I stayed at this little motel or hotel down here by Nawilli Harbor. Stayed there about a month and a half until I was finally able to find a house to rent. Then I sent for the whole family to come over from Honolulu. They shipped everything over for free. So there's the hotel that I stayed at. Garden Island Hotel. Nice little place. Stayed there a couple of months. Right across the street was a restaurant and nightclub. I used to have breakfast in and dinner at night and then take in the nightly entertainment there. Then I finally found a place over in the little town of Koloa. So I moved out of that hotel into this nice little 3-bedroom house over in Koloa. Had a nice big yard full of fruit trees, banana, mangoes, papayas, everything you could think of. Good sized yard. Hidden in all those trees is the house. There it is. Had a good sized front yard. I used to love this drive home from work, especially riding my motorcycle. The trees overhung the roadway. Coming home one day on this road, I was so impressed by the scene that I was able to see way out there that I went clear across the other side of the road and almost went over the side. Trees have grown up quite a bit by now. But there's that house right down there in the middle. Little town of Koloa. We lived there for probably 6 or 8 months. Then some guy came over one day, wanted to know if I'd swap houses with him, because he couldn't stand living next door to his mother, or at least his wife didn't. So we moved into this little 2-bedroom house and saved almost $100 a month on rent and let him have that big house. So that's where we lived until we finally split up and I moved back to California. And the family went over to Honolulu. So I went back into San Jose, California. Moved in with my mother for a short time till I could find me a little apartment. By now my mother had a new house on Fairview Avenue now. Still in Willow Glen. This is the house all the kids remember growing up in, going for grandma's house for Christmas and Thanksgiving holidays and things. Then I found a little studio apartment across town, $50 a month rent. Wasn't bad. So I lived there probably for about a year. Then I went to Honolulu on vacation to visit with the kids. Brought one of them back with me. And then I finally was given custody of all the kids, so I bought a house. Spent the next couple of months fixing it all up. Got some friends that come over and help paint the house and the inside. Bought all new furniture and everything. Then in October of 1971, the kids flew in from Honolulu and moved into their future home there. It was a 4-bedroom house, paid $24,000. Just think of the prices of homes today. That one's going for over $1 million now. Had a nice little backyard. Was able to expand it out all the way into the PG&E alleyway there. Looks like everybody else did the same thing after I left. There's a nice little house. I lived there for almost 18 years. All the kids grew up there. I got married there in 1981. Then in 1988, we moved out of there. We'd already bought a house up in Applegate in 1986. So in January of '88, we moved out of this house and rented it, and then moved into Applegate that we'd been renting. Had to get the renters to move out, which they weren't too happy about. But we moved up into Applegate, and we lived there for, gosh, 16 years. Had 2 acres, a little over 2 acres. I built a large patio off the side of the house, put in lawns, added on a bigger workshop to the back end. I like this nice little driveway. It was about a 300-foot driveway all the way into the house. Driveway was lined with oak trees. This was a fairly new subdivision that went in next door to us, all the way up the hill there. Joyce and me both got a job just about 8 miles from the house at a company called Coherent Laser Company. Joyce got on working in the laser optic department, and I got a job as building maintenance, taking care of the electrical and plumbing and everything. I lasted there about 5 years. Then they had a big layoff in the 90s. The company gave me about 3 months notice before my layoff. In the meantime, I bought equipment and started my own engraving business in my shop at home. Then I got a job also at the Holiday Inn, the new hotel they built in town. And in '98 I retired. In 2000 we bought some property down in Yuma, Arizona. Then in 2003 to 2006 I built a little house down there. Took me almost 2 years because we come down in the winter time and spend about 6 months almost down there working on the property there. Then I built a little shop in the back and brought my engraving stuff down there. So this is the little place I built. Finished it in 2006 and sold it in 2010. That's Uncle Wayne and Aunt Shirley's RV on the other side because we went partners at first. Then in 2003 we sold the house in Applegate and we moved over to Henderson, Nevada. And as of 2023, we're still here. It's a nice little 3-bedroom home with a 3-car garage. Actually a 4-bedroom. If you put a little closet in the den area, you could have 4 bedrooms. It's got 3-car garage and 1 car, the small one there, I have my engraving equipment set up. So I still keep a hand in that as a hobby. So there you have it, just a brief take on all the places I've lived from birth until 2023 at the age of 85. And beyond, I hope. Bye-bye.
That's all, folks.